Hello guys, welcome back to our REST API series. Picking up from where we stop, we want to start working on the REST API aspect of the API. Alright, so we want to start implementing the functionalities for users that are chefs to be able to create recipes. We're going to create a new app for that. We're going to create an app, call it any name you want. So we're going to call it food app. Alright, so we've created our food app. So we head back to our code. Now you can see the food app that we just created. Alright, that's good. So first of all, let's add this app to our settings file. So go to our project settings and then install the app. Alright, so that's that. Then secondly, inside the food app, let's head over to the model. Let's start first of all create all the structures for model in here. And the way this is going to be, we're going to have some kind of category model that's going to contain the different categories of food, and also we're going to have a model for food which we're going to call category, and we just need a name. Also we just need to create a string representation. Alright, so that's for the category model, and we want to create a food model, and this is going to have probably the name of the food and other things. We can the category that this food belongs to. This is going to be a relationship, so model.foreign key, description of the food, the ingredients of the food, like nutritional value. Then other stuff we can put is probably the origin of the food, maybe a photo of the prepared meal. So we're going to put something like a picture. Let's give it initially blank equals true, and then uploaded to. Alright, so if there's any other thing, or less before I forget, the chef that is actually making this food information available to us, this should be a relationship to the chef model. So we need to import the chef model. So alright, so that's the users that are chef. I think that's all for now. If there's any other information we need to add to it, we'll do that maybe later on. So first of all, let's create a string representation of which implies the name of the food. Lastly, let's create another model. So we're going to just create all our food model now. So we'll call this food recipe. Food recipe, because recipe is like the set of instructions to actually make the food. In here, we're going to first of all have a relationship with the food. We need the procedures. It's not like the cooking procedures, so this kind of be like something like a cooking duration. How long does it take to prepare this food? So cooking duration. Alright, so these are 3 meal there. So if there's any other information we need to add, we can do that later on. So let's save these 3 model now, and we need to add them to our admin. Import all. So our models are created, so we need to run migration. So we'll make our migration. So Python -py make migration. So we migrate. Alright, so we can run our server again. So now we've made our model, so we need to create the serializers for this model. Alright, so we're going to create 3 serializers. So in our food app, we're going to create serializer.py file. Alright, for the food app. So here we're going to create our serializer. So we're going to import from REST. So we're going to create the serializer for the category. So we're going to say category. That's the model serializer. Class meta, specify the model. Let's say form.model, and the feeds we want to serialize are basically just the let's get the ID and the name, I guess. Right, that's for the category serializer. So we're going to create serializer for the food model and the food recipe model. Now the food model and the food recipe model has a relationship. So in this place we are going to be using a nested serializer. Alright, so first of all we're going to create the food recipe serializer, not serializer, not the food serializer, the food recipe first. I'll show you a reason why we are doing that. Meta, I guess, and then the model. So Visual Studio Code Auto import it for us. That's fine. So we can specify the feeds. There's obviously so the feeds we want serialize. We want to get this one what I'm talking about. The food recipe has a relationship with the food model and also the procedures of making the food and the cooking. And we're going to place a related name in this feed. So let's quickly do that. Just add related name. Related name, we're going to give it recipes. Alright, so we'll make migration for that. So first of all we need to get let's get the ID of the recipe, and then we're also going to get the procedures and the cooking duration. Alright, so this is the feeds that we're going to be getting from the food recipe serializer. Now you may think, why are we not providing the food, which is a relationship? So we're going to use a reverse relationship to actually add the food, because we're going to be using a nested serializer to combine the food recipe and the food. So next we create the food serializer, and in here two special feeds that we want here is we want I think we have a relationship to the chef. Let's check. Yeah, we have a foreign key relationship to the chef, and we have a kind of a foreign key to the food, which we are going to use reverse relationship to get. So in this place we are going to first of all get want to represent our chef with the string related feed, so name, and we're going to set the read only equals true. That's for the chef, so I can get the chef object that actually is creating the food recipe or food that we want to prepare. And also we also need the recipes, which is going to be a nested relationship to the food recipe that we made up. And because the relationship between these recipes and this food serializer, it's a one-to-many relationship, we need to specify the many property, set it to true. Alright, so we have these two feeds. Then here we can create our class meta, which is obviously going to be the food, and we specify the feeds. So to get the ID of the food, we need to get the name, Alright, so these are the feeds. We want the ID, we want the name, the descriptions, the ingredients, the nutritional values, the origin, probably a picture of the food, and also the chef, which we defined here to be a string related name. Alright, to our chef object. So, and also we have this recipe, which is a nested relationship to our food recipe, so we need to add that here as our last feed, so we call it recipes. Alright, so in this case, what are we doing here? Remember, this food serializer is actually communicated to the food model, and the food model doesn't have the recipe as a feed, but it has a relationship to the food recipes model. Alright, so we're actually using a reverse relationship. That's why we are adding the related name, so that you can access this feed just like in our normal Django with the related name. It will make sense very soon once we are done with what we are doing. Alright, so that's that. You can save this, and what we're going to do next is we're going to create a special permission, because it's not all users that are chef, so we only want users that are chef to be able to provide or create food and food restricted permission that restrict other users that are not chef from. We need to make migration because of this little modification that we made in this model, and I mistakenly omit a feed, which is supposed to be the category feed, also the category which is a foreign key also, but this we are going to be providing the category feed. Alright, so that's that. Migration. Head over to our server. We can just quickly quit this and so run back our server. So that's that. Alright, so we're going to create a custom permission class for the chef users. Alright, so just like we have our is authenticated, is user, is admin users, all these are custom, all these are default permissions. We want to create our own custom permissions for users that are chef only. We're going to create a file. I'm going to place this in our authentication app, because everything regarding authentication authorization should be in one place. So in here, I'm going to create a simple permission.py file. And for us to create our custom permissions, we need to import the permissions, and we're going to create our custom permission class. And by convention, you always start with is whatever, maybe is chef, is special user, whatever user you're calling. So this is going to be chef. Alright, so we can say it's chef user, or we can just say it's chef, depends on how we want to name it. So this is going to extend the permissions.base permission class. Alright, so this is the base class for every permissions that we have in our REST API. So this permission, and this permission provides two special methods for us to override whenever we want to create our custom permissions, which are the has permission class, has permission method, and the has object permission method. So if we check our documentation, you can go straight to the permission. Under permission, you can come to where they give us guidelines to write custom permissions. You can say to implement the custom permissions, we need to override the base permission which you already extended, and implement either or both of the following method, which is the has permission method and has object permission. So these are the two methods that we are to override for our custom permissions. The has permissions actually talks about permissions for accessing a view, while has object permissions talks about relation with your model. If the permissions provide allow the user or whatever to access your model, modify your model and all that. So that's the object permissions, and these two methods are only to return probably true or false. You can actually read more about it, so go back to our code, and in here we're going to override the has permission, not as object, has permission class. Alright, so you can see this has takes in the request and the view that this permission is going to affect. So we're simply going to return true if if the user is a chef. So it's a boolean value, so we just say return boolean value if the request.user and request.user is chef. Alright, so it's like two conditions. It must be logged in one, and the logged in user must be a chef. Alright, so we'll be doing overriding only this very one, but in some case may you need to override the two. It's a very simple thing. You just have to define the has object permission. That has to do with if the user has access to maybe edit or make changes to some database objects. Alright, so for now we'll be using only this has permission class, and that's all. I think maybe we just need to restart our server. So up next we can go to our view now and start creating our view. So first of all, we want to be able to create categories. Alright, so categories of food. So we just create a endpoint in our view, import from REST framework.generics. Create our class. So this is going to be a very simple create view. So we just specify our Serializer class. Alright, so once we hit enter, automatically import it for us. So it's imported already. So that's what Visual Studio Code does for us. So the permission classes. So in this case, we need to also import the permission classes. We'll be importing our custom from. We'll import the is chef, and also import from REST framework dedicated. Alright, so in here, for you to create a food category, you need to be a chef. So first we put the is authenticated, followed by the is chef permission class. Lastly, the query set, which we use to determine the model object to return, and we need to import that. So alright, so these are just this 4 line of code. Get our create view for category. So let's quickly do a view to list available category. So you can see how easy it is to work with generic API views. And this we are only going to be listing, so specify Serializer as permission classes. And this is going to be just is authenticated, because every other user can say all the food category if you want to. Alright, so we have our list food category API view and the add category API view. Alright, then there is also a generic view for us to combine both, which is the list create. But the reason why I'm separating it is basically because users that are chef can create, but users that are not chef can also view the list view, but they cannot add a category because they are not chef. It's only chef users that can add. So that's why we are having two separate API views for such occasions. So let's create the URL for this. So in our food Alright, we can save this and then head over to the project URL.py file. It's going to be API slash, you can say version 1 slash. Alright, test if we can add a food category, and also test if we can see the food categories that we've added. So let's double check if we save everything correctly. Alright, so we're going to be testing with Postman, and there's no need for me to go through the authentication process again. I'm already authenticated, so I've already had the user and the admin user auth token to the authorization header. So we just go straight to our endpoint. So already have either the request is a post request, and the only field is expecting is the name. So in here we just put in the name, and let's create a category for snacks. Let's send. Alright, you see we had snacks created, so let's create one more for soup. Let's call it soup. Sauces. We've created another one. Okay, let's add just one for. Alright, so let's try and get our category now. Endpoints for category list, which is food as category. This is a get request, so it's going to be a get request, and then we don't need any parameters. We can make our get request. We can see our category list. We just created snacks, sauce, pastries. Alright, so that's working fine. So let's head back to our code. Alright, so we're going to implement the view to create the food and recipe endpoint, and for this we are going to be using the generic API view alone. So earlier we'll be talking about specific generic views that handles specific tasks, like the create API view, list API view. And one thing to note is that these views are extending from the generic API view, plus there are various mixing like the create model mixing, list model mixings, and so many others. So you can also use the generic API view alone. So that's what we'll be using for this very view that I want to create now. One thing to note is that this generic API view is actually what holds the base attributes and the method that made up a generic view, like our serializer class, the permission class, query sets, get query set. All these attributes and methods are actually implemented in the generic API view. Alright, so we'll see how we use the generic API view now. So let's take this out and create our class. Alright, so I guess it's auto imported for us. So if we check, alright, it's imported. So here we're also going to specify our serializer class. Then we can also specify our permission class, and also its chef, because only chef users that can create recipe. Alright, so here we can implement our post method because it's going to be a post request. So this taking self. So the post request, the post data is going to be in the request.data, so we can just store that in a variable. And if we observe the kind of data that we are expecting from our post request, from the food model, we are expecting the chef, which is also a foreign key to the chef book, and then this feed is what we are expecting, and also we are also expecting the food recipe feeds, which is the procedure feed and the cook time feed. So this particular view is kind of handling a post request for two separate models. So for that we need to get the chef object, which is a foreign key to the food model. This is going to be the chef book.object.get, where the chef is equal to the logged in user. Alright, so once we have that, we can call our serializer class. Alright, now we can pass in the data that is coming from our post request. So once we have this, we can call the validate method on the serializer by saying if so here we're going to call the save method on the serializer, so by saying serializer.save, and in here we're going to pass the chef attribute on the model, that is on the food model. We're going to set it to the chef object that we'll get from our chef book. Alright, so once we do that, we want to return a respond. Then to import the respond object from and here we want to return the serializer dot data and with the status. So we need to import status from REST framework. So we're going to say status.http created. Alright, so that's if everything works fine. And meanwhile, if for some reason maybe some field we are missing and all of that, we want to return another respond on the status. We want to return part request. Alright, so for the view, that's all. But one thing we need to do is remember that this save method is going to call our create method. It's actually our create method that is going to handle the logic to actually create for both model. Alright, so go to our serializer. Under our serializer, for serializer, we're going to implement the create method. So we're going to define the create method. Alright, so in this serializer, the data that is coming into the serializer is actually the food data and also the food recipe data. So we need to first of all say the recipe, which is going to be from the validated data dot pop. The validated data actually holds all the data that is actually coming, both the food recipe and the food model. Right, so we want to pop out the recipes. Alright, so what we mean by this recipe is we are popping out this recipe from this serializer, which is actually the food recipe serializer, which is the procedures and the cooking duration. Alright, so we'll pop that out and we'll store it into the recipe data. Then once we do that, we can create the food by saying food objects data art. We can just kind of spread validated data. Alright, so once we create the food, then we can create the food recipe by saying recipe, which is equals to the food, where the food is equaling to the food objects that we've created. And if you check our model, in the food recipe we have the food, we have the procedures, and we have the cooking duration. Alright, the procedures is equivalent to the recipe data. Alright, so after we create the food, we create the recipe, and after that we return the food because we are actually operating on the food serializer. So we return the food. That's for the create method. So all we need to do next is to create the URL for this class. Alright, so this is the URL, so we can save this. So before we test, let's actually create the food list endpoint and also the food detail endpoint so we can test everything at once. So we create another class, we can call it and this is going to extend the list API view. So similar, we just get the serializer class. This time it's going to be only authenticated user. So we specify the query set. This is all for our food list API view. Create the food detail view, and this we're going to extend the retrieve API view, so we need to import that. Also, similar, we specify the Serializer class, query sets with the permission class, and lastly we need to provide a lookup feed. This is going to be the primary key. So that's also, we need to set up the URL for these two class. Alright, so these are our endpoints. Our URL is set up, so you can save this, and I think we are good to go. So we can try out if we can create recipe now. Alright, so before we test our API, let's provide the poster class for the image feed. Remember, we have an image feed in our food model, which is called picture. Alright, so though we pass none and void, blank and none equals true, but we need to provide the poster feed in case there is need for us to provide the image. So that we just simply provide the poster class for me. So if you check, you can see in our imports here we have, look at them. We can save this now. We can test our endpoint. So if we head over to Postman, and then let's test our create food recipe endpoint. So we already have our authentication here, so I'm not going to bore you with that. So I just grab this token for the admin user and paste it in the header here. So that's already done for us. So let's provide our endpoint, which is going to, in this case we cannot use form data because we are actually combining two feeds. So we're going to use the raw JSON data. So we go to raw and make sure you change it to JSON, this value to JSON, and here we're going to paste, because the feed is merged, so I'm going to just paste the feed here. Alright, so we have all our feed here now. So let's go through them. You can see we have the name, we have the category, we have the description, ingredients, nutritional value, origin, recipe. We cannot provide the picture because we are using raw JSON. Alright, and then we have the recipe, which is supposed to come as a list because it's a many to many, one to many feed. Alright, so in case we are providing multiple recipes for the same food. Alright, so we have the procedures and the cooking time. So let's try and let's test our request now and make sure our server is up and running. Alright, so if we send our request now, hopefully everything works fine. Alright, we are getting 500 internal server error. So let's check. You see, list indents must be integer or / not string. Okay, I think these issues, if we check let's check our console again. Alright, oh, this error is actually coming from our create method. So let's head back to our create method, and because the recipe data is actually coming as a list, though we just have one object in the list, so we need to kind of loop through it. Though we know it's just one object, so we can just perform some kind of for loop here. Let's say for recipe, take this out and let's tab this in. Alright, so instead of us, now we are looping through the recipe data list, though we have just one object in the list, so that object is stored in our recipe. So we can, instead of us providing this feed like this, we can move this and spread the dictionary object, passing the recipe dictionary. Alright, so because it's coming as a dictionary inside the list, so we'll pass it like this, and that will work for us. So let's save this and try and run our post request again. So if we run our post request now, we can see we get 201 created. That means it was successful. Alright, so let's check the object that was returned back to us. We can see the object that was returned back to us. Alright, so it seems like the previous one actually worked just for the recipe that was not created. So that's why we're having this. So let's try and create more. Let's run one more again. We get another created. Alright, so I've created a couple of food. Get food list recipe. So here we can just provide it. Since we are having issues with our endpoint, which is the URL, okay, sorry, we have a little error here. Double slash before. Alright, so let's run it again. Okay, you can see we are getting our food list with the recipes. You can see the very first one, you can see the second one that was created. So we can see our food recipe is actually working and create food recipe is working. So let's check if we can get a detail food with the ID of 3. Alright, so that's going to be food detail